what was very interesting was initially Muthulakshmi Reddy showed reluctance getting married. She did say that she want to kind of tie knots and find herself bound to um, certain relationships. That is because she felt the independence and freedom of a woman came from education, came from her approach of doing things within life and her freedom to pursue what she wanted to within the career. Whereas for her mother, it was the dignity lied in the concept of marriage, in the concept of being a wife, the dignity that she had derived from that, that honor that she derived from having that. Very again very different to see that how they kind of conversed under the same roof on the same concept. Um, so right after that talks and when Muthulakshmi came to Pudukkottai during her holiday time, she was a fourth year student, and again with the age being a factor in most of the Indian households. Have pressure and a lot of family talks where there were conversations about thinking about marriage and also a lot of proposals that they had bought in for her. And she, without any hesitation, refused to even look at them. Um, so there's also a mention in the chapter about Sister Subbalakshmi, who was apparently the head of the young widows home, which was a very beautiful concept, and I felt that was, I don't know how much of it is in current situation as well. We do families still going through the same thing, and this was the mention about how she got widowed at a very young age, but then it was about she being constrained to kitchen, she not being allowed to even get join into any family rituals. So a lot of blockages that could have come from from a house. Her father's support was her biggest push for her in her life. He decided to move from, I believe, Saidapet to Egmore so that she could continue her education. And the father used to travel from Egmore to Saidapet for his work. So the dedication that the father gave her all the support to complete her education so that she was able to do something for the society, and that was a game changer where she established the young widows home, which is apparently started as a small at the I think it was the ice factory, if I'm not wrong, and I think that was where options there. Like they had spaces, they had their rescue models and things like that. So I think it was the ice house, if I'm not wrong. That's where they started running the uh, home for the widows, young widows again. So at this point, found her interest and continued, but alongside her seeing the role of a doctor, she continued doing both. And because of her wish of not getting married and she not agreeing to get married, her father gave her, like, it's I think it's a common thing, right? Like you get to hear a lot of family common words that has been passed down from generations to generation when a girl decides to tell that I don't want to get married. So she did hear a lot of concepts, and I think that moved her, kind of stuck to her decision. And hearing about Muthulakshmi came the proposal of Dr. Sundaram Reddy, who was also the first FRCH, Indian FRCH, and he was determined to marry somebody like this who had great principles, and he made sure that he came to visit her mother and did convince her, saying that I will be one of that person who will make sure that your daughter is respected. I will be a son to you. There were family sentiments within his conflict. As parents, they were completely convinced about what his intentions were. And Muthulakshmi was not very keen, and that was seen. And Sundaram Reddy was quite disappointed that she was not kind of giving that impression to even talk. But when he tried ringing her for the second time, I think the conversation then struck in, and she was she found a gentleman in him, and then decided that they would get married. Um, and I think the the image of Sundaram Reddy was given very beautifully, because he had the support of his uncle, and his uncle, because he raised him, he just said, okay, why don't you marry the girl that I chose for you? And he was very clear that he wouldn't do that. He decided to let go of everything, borrowed a 5 rupees, went to Bangalore, and from there took a loan of 20,000, which apparently was a big amount at that time, generations, and decided to go and complete his education. He was a self-made man in all ways, and I think that's very clearly written in the paragraphs that they have mentioned. Yeah, I think the other thing that really struck me was about their concept of marriage, and as to how they wanted to ritually get married, their rituals that they thought of, because Muthulakshmi was quite an admirer of the Theosophical Society, and because of the leadership of Annie Besant, and she was quite moved, and she really wanted to kind of look at the context of what they wanted. So that was very much discussed in this chapter, and it was even the 7 steps that the Saptapad. It was not around the home. There was no fire, but they had a ritual that was very personal to them, and they believed in that ritual. The promises that they took were quite. It was West, so it was quite a very the vows, like how we see in the Western marriages, how they've been spoken, or how they've been kind of articulated for a wedding, versus to how we see in the Southeast. So I think it was a culmination of both, and that was very interesting to read. I really found that quite it as a couple to kind of look through certain things, understand what the principles of marriage was, and find their space together with that concept. I found that very, very interesting. Um, what I also found very interesting was how, as couple, they kind of had their own individual responsibilities in career, and when Muthulakshmi was earning a lot more than her husband, Dr. Reddy, he still kind of had kept his shoes in. Even if there were, he made sure he spoke to him, which is a very beautiful line that he kept talking to himself, which I found it very, very interesting about how they had their chemistry within them. Um, and also, um, what was also interesting was they did not talk of the bed of roses. They also spoke and discussed about the problems. He had to travel to Pudukkottai to kind of start his new role as a chief medical officer. There were a lot of ups and downs through this. His health kind of took a toll, but I think at the end of the day, they had a life that they believed was very luxurious. They had all that was kept to them very, very beautifully. But it was a lot of struggles through that. It was not an easy task. He made sure that she had all that she wanted to do was going on. There was no hindrance to it, and there was a complete support of Dr. Reddy in this whole thing, in the whole process of it. Um, and the other aspect which I found very interesting was the birth of Ram. If I'm not wrong, the first child, Ram Mohan. Yeah. So have I got his name right? I think it is Ram Mohan, right? Yeah. Yeah. So his first child, the birth, the labor period, the explanation that was given through it, like in terms of the emotional turbulence that the mother went through, the disturbance after the birth of the child that both the parents had, was very much was very much personal, but I think the way they looked at it and the way that has been discussed found a very beautiful spot within how they've kind of channelized her life, how her life took turns through all this emotional. So the second child's birth was, I think, it was very interesting that it was the first child had this turbulence. The second child, she lost her mother. She had to undergo a lot of work where her husband and her sister both were hit with a point in the couple's life where they decided to forget about everybody else and just focus on standing on their feet, which was also a very beautiful discussion where they had a period where they couldn't um, take care of things, and there was a period where they said that they wanted to stand on their feet. And I think that was a period where I think it was very interesting because all of us go through that at some point of life when some turbulences hits. And first we are like, okay, let me just focus on to mine. So it was quite well alongside these discussions of hers. Um, um, I think from all the luxuries that they had to kind of finally move to Madras, let go of what they had very comfortable, but to find focus on what they wanted to do was yet another beautiful interaction. How the couple kind of conversed this, and finally it was about how he was nominated to be one of the assistant professors at that time, and that was the reason why they had moved, and that was the reason why they had taken up all these difficulties, let go of all the luxuries and everything. But amidst all this, uh, Muthulakshmi always opened her doors, both of heart and home, to welcome dancers, musicians, and she was there. And there was social, there was also service that she did in terms of her role as a doctor, and I think that that really showed a very beautiful concept of what marriage was, what family life was, but also how she kind of juggled through it, the disturbances and turbulences that she had through of um, having a child, and how it kind of moved alongside her pathway of life was very beautifully discussed in this chapter. So I think this chapter for me had, including the position of the couple that together, how they kind of positioned themselves so that it at that generation, and how they kind of thought through it. So I found that very, very interesting and authentic. So yeah, that's on the chapter, the glimpse of the chapter for Lakshmi. Mitra, do you want to do chapter 5?
Yes. I think Lakshmi, I shared with you the slides, I think.
Yeah.
Bring them up.
Lakshmi, should I share the slides again, or were you able to find them?
Lakshmi, you're on mute. Uh, Mitra wouldn't be able to share, right? Mitra, you see if you
Yeah, I think
do
it
you see
says
the share option?
it says disabled part. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm. I think you're the host now, right? So I think
Yeah,
they.
I'm going to share the screen now and let me see. Right.
Okay.
You can see?
Mm, not yet. Now, yeah.
Opened up.
Um, I think the screen is a little bit frozen, but I can go ahead and get started. So I've just split this summary into 5 sections. First, Tyagaraja's death, and then the Tyagaraja Aradhana begins to be conducted, um, and then we see that politics
Yes.
kind of factors this. Oh,
I think there was some momentary lapse and I was made the host. I have made you the host now, Mitra.
okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I can try
I don't
sharing your screen.
Sure, sure.
Okay. Um, let me see. Okay. So let me just present this. Can you all see the screen or not? Can see. Okay. Okay. So you can see when I put the slides, like you can see them changing, right? Okay. Oh, no. Okay, I'll just do it like this then. I think that's okay. So here's just a brief overview of the things that happened in this chapter, and then we'll just go through each one of these events. But first, we see that Saint Tyagaraja dies. So he dies in on Jan 6th, 1847 in Tiruvayyaru, and he's given a Brahmin burial. at Mangudiyar Samadhi. And he kind of leaves behind these three lineages of his students, and these are all kind of the villages where he taught. So we'll see his disciples from these lineages kind of take up the celebration of his life and things in further down in the chapter. So just some basic things, like directly after Tyagaraja's death, the annual ceremony is conducted by his grandson Panchapakesa till his death, and Panchapakesaya actually died pretty early on. So then the Shraddha is relocated to Subbarama Bhagavatar's residence, who was another disciple of Tyagaraja. But kind of over the years, his samadhi or his shrine in Tiruvayara becomes neglected, and so it's not very well kept and things. So a few years later, this shrine is found and renovated and maintained by the Umayalpuram brothers, Krishna and Sundaram Bhagavatar. And just an interesting kind of note that the author mentioned is that these Umayalpuram brothers' disciple is he sold a portrait of Tyagaraja to Nagaratnama, which we saw in a previous chapter. And then after that, the responsibility of the annual rites is assumed by these Tillaistaram brothers, who are one of the three lineages, Narasimha and Panchu Bhagavatar. And these two will become pretty big players in the rest of the chapter, as we'll see. So this is kind of just what happens after Tyagaraja's death. So I have a couple of pictures here. So this one is kind of what we might think of the Brahmin burial looks like. There's quite a lengthy description of it in the chapter, but this may have been sort of what the procession looked like, and yeah, so we can kind of think about that. Yeah, I think, and then he will probably be cremated after this. So this is the kind of like respect that Tyagaraja was given even after his death. And then here is just a map of Tiruvayara. So this is like the bottom of, this is like in Tamil Nadu, just like kind of zoomed out a little bit, and it's kind of on this near the coast kind of. And then there's another map later that will show, but these rivers, if you can see them really faintly, this one is the smaller one is the Kaveri River. So you can see that it's actually on the banks of the Kaveri River. Okay. Okay, so now we know that Narasimha Bhagavatar and Panchu Bhagavatar have kind of assumed the responsibility of celebrating Tyagaraja's last rites, or this annual celebration. So they established this Tyagaraja Aradhana. So yeah, basically Narasimha and Panchu Bhagavatar established this format for the Aradhana and popularized its observance among those residing in Tiruvayar. So the venue that they chose was this Choltree, founded by a wealthy Dubash, and the Dubash is a translator. And so this kind of just reminds you that this political environment that we're in right now is like India is currently under the influence of the British East India Company. So all these wealthy people are, because of this trading with the British. So it's kind of interesting to be reminded of where we're situated. So basically during this Aradhana, the Samadhi is worshipped, and then they have music festivals, and they seek alms because that's something that Tyagaraja would do. And then the Brahmins, the musicians, and the poor people would eat, and they would eat the things collected from the alms. And then in the evening, they would have Harikatha performances. So another thing to kind of note is that these rituals that were conducted to celebrate Tyagaraja, who's a mortal living person, it has a lot of elements of like a godly stature. His portrait is taken out in a procession. He's worshipped. So I think this kind of treatment of Tyagaraja of Saint Tyagaraja in his later life, it kind of increases the legitimacy of the arts, right? You're kind of treating somebody who was a very influential figure in music as somebody who can be worshipped, and so I think that's something that's important to note. So after a couple years of this Tyagaraja Aradhana, kind of taking place, both Narasimha and Panchu Bhagavatar kind of decide and think that it's important for musicians who like sing a lot of Tyagaraja's compositions in their own concerts, so kind of benefit from Tyagaraja's compositions, should contribute quite heavily to the running of the Aradhana, because obviously these things cost a lot of money. So in 1907, they kind of had this appeal, the Tiruvayar Sangeeta Shikamani. This is the appeal to the public and to musicians who often sign Tyagaraja's compositions to donate graciously to the Aradhana's cause. So they're rallying in a lot of money and support for their celebration. And kind of just a little note here that Narasimha Bhagavata, one of the brothers that kind of were running this, he was a Harikatha performer. So his performance in 1908 was a great success, and after that, the public generously donated a lot of money, and so the 1909 Aradhana was able to be really big success, and it was the first one to span 5 days instead of just the normal 1 day. So kind of you can see it growing in intensity and pomp. So despite the Aradhana being a really big success, there was discrimination that we could see in the way the Aradhana was running. So mainly Nagaswaram artists, which I was a little bit confused because I thought the instrument was called Nadaswaram, but perhaps they just call it something different or it's something else. But I don't know if someone can help elucidate that. But the Nagaswaram artists and the women were the main kind of objects of discrimination here. So typically the Nagaswaram artists are not allowed to perform on the dais because they belong to these lower caste groups, and they usually play with like no shirt or no kind of covering of their upper body. So all these things were traditionally not done. And they never were able to play when the deities were in procession. But because the Nagaswaram artists had a large part in helping the Aradhana take place, they kind of had to be kept happy, right? I mean, it wasn't really out of respect for these artists, but mainly because they needed their funds and they needed their support in order to continue conducting the Aradhana. So they kind of made as in the Brahmins and the leadership of the Aradhana kind of made an exception for the Nagaswaram artists, and they were allowed to play their instruments with the portrait of Tyagaraja in procession, but at night. So late at night, the procession would come out again, Tyagaraja's portrait, and then at that time, the Nagaswaram artists could play. Women, on the other hand, were never allowed to pay their respects to Tyagaraja's portrait or participate at all in the Aradhana. And only the Devadasis and few Devadasis and also like one up and coming Harikatha performer was mentioned, and she was a Brahmin. So note that the status of these women also mattered. They could only offer musical homage. However, I will say on this note, this is kind of where I myself was a little bit confused, because it said that only the Devadasis could offer the musical homage, but typically they weren't allowed, but they were typically not allowed even inside the venue and stuff. So I'm not really sure, if they were the ones who could, not completely sure, or perhaps they were able to offer their homage like one time or something, and then that tradition discontinued. But basically the popular opinion was that Devadasis were prostitutes, and then secondly, menstrual cycles made women impure. And this was kind of a contradiction, because all of the Vidwans who participated in the Aradhana had wives, mothers, daughters themselves, and several of them actually had relationships with Devadasis and engaged in this the prostitution, if you will, that Devadasis are engaged in, but they still didn't allow Devadasis to come. So basically, to kind of support this argument that Devadasi and women cannot come, they kind of cited this song from of Tyagaraja's, Menu Juchi. And so these are kind of the lyrics. Oh, mind, do not be deluded and taken in by the external charm of women. By their amorous glances, they enslave and delight lewd men, landing them ultimately in misery and distress. Do not be enticed by such deceptive appearances. redeem yourself by singing the glory of the Lord. So this is really, I mean, it just kind of ties right back into this, because basically they're saying that these, the amorous glances, they enslave and delight lewd men, is talking about, if they wanted to talk about the Devadasis in this way. And these men, who a lot of them had relationships with Devadasis, some perhaps they feel that they can redeem themselves by singing the glory of the Lord. So kind of using the song as an excuse for not allowing these women to come and participate is a little bit ironic, because they are their enablers, right? So that's something that was interesting. Okay, so the Aradhana was running pretty smoothly for a few years, but then they split up into two kachis, which we'll talk about. So politics fractures the group into Periya Kachi and Chinna Kachi. So basically there's like public jealousy, nudging, and financial quarrels, and basically the two brothers, Narasimha Bhagavatar and Panchu Bhagavatar, are no longer on speaking terms. And so Narasimha Bhagavatar says, okay, I'm going to conduct a separate Aradhana in Kumbakonam, and Panchu Bhagavatar continues his tradition in Tiruvayar. And so obviously, just a note here, Narasimha Bhagavatar's group is called the Periya Kachi because Narasimha Bhagavatar is older, and then the younger brother, Panchu Bhagavatar, his group is the Chinna Kachi. So Narasimha Bhagavatar actually passed away really soon after the festivities began in 1911, which is the first year that the Aradhana was celebrated also in Kumbakonam. So all the kind of leaders of the Periya Kachi decided that, okay, Kumbakonam is not auspicious for this. So we're going to put we're going to relocate the Aradhana back to Tiruvayar. So Tiruvayara actually, for a few years, saw the two opposing factions celebrating the Aradhana simultaneously, but separately. So there was like obviously a lot of tension here because they're in the same city, but celebrating two separate Aradhanas. So it's kind of an interesting fact. The two groups they would meet on Kumbakonam Road after the Chinna Kachi had worshipped the Samadhi and before the Periya Kachi were to perform the ritual. So the Chinna Kachi would go in the morning, and then they would come back on Kumbakonam Road while the Periya Kachi was traveling on Kumbakonam Road to the Samadhi. So there was kind of this face-off that happened on Kumbakonam Road. So here's a map. So okay, let me see if I can zoom in. Okay, basically, if you guys remember, this was kind of the river, and this is kind of the area where I think Tiruvayara would have been like here or something, but actually when you zoom into the map, it's actually like an 8-hour walk from Tiruvayara to Kumbakonam bypass road. So it's a really long journey that they're making to get between these two areas. And then this is the road that they would have likely met on. So this is Kumbakonam bypass road, but this kind of that goes down here is this bypass road. So we have it zoomed in here. This is the road. And then here's the Kaveri River. So I can assume that they probably met somewhere here along this road. Yeah, but these two areas are quite far apart. But perhaps without like the highway system that we have now, maybe it would have been actually a shorter distance, but we don't know. Right now, if you had to walk, it would be like 8 hours. So I think this is a good time to kind of just go over some of the people in these two kachis, because they kind of have a lot of prominence in the rest of this chapter, as well as in the 6th chapter as well. And, so the Periya Kachi, of course, the leader is Narasimha Bhagavatar, who by this time has probably passed away, but he's still kind of the kingpin of this, at least conceptually, he's the leader of the Periya Kachi. And then Malaikoti Govindasamy Pillai, he was kind of the first supporter of the Periya Kachi as soon as the two kachis like split up. And he was a Harikatha performer, as was Narasimha Bhagavatar. So I can imagine they would have been like in the same field, like around the same time. And he mainly provided funds for the Periya Kachi because he was very, very influential performer. And he kind of was able to secure a lot of funding for the Periya Kachi to run its celebrations. And then we have Ramuru Bhagavatar, who was instated as the leader, or the person who would perform the rites, not necessarily the political leader, but the person who would perform the rites at the Samadhi after Narasimha Bhagavatar passed away. And this choice was very interesting because Ramudu Bhagavatar is actually a descendant of Tyagaraja's brother. The book calls him Japesa, but there are other kind of names for him that people like Purvaju. There are different names, but he's a descendant of Tyagaraja's brother, who we know that Tyagaraja disliked him or had a lot of tension with him. And you can kind of see in this one song, there's a couple of songs that I found, and this one is the one that I'm pretty sure they mentioned in the book. This is just to illustrate that Tyagaraja and his brother did not get along. So Japesa throws Tyagaraja's idol of Lord Rama into the Kaveri River, and then Tyagaraja creates a song, asking, "Oh, when are you going to return to me, O Lord Rama?" So there are a couple of songs. This Endu Dagi Nardo, I don't know. I think that one is the one that they mentioned in the book. And then this one is another song that has the same kind of context. Like, do not say, please protect me from the troubles and tortures of my elder brother. So we see that Tyagaraja was not exactly on the best of terms with his brother, yet that brother's descendant is kind of running the ritual. So it's a little bit ironic. So we don't really know why they picked him, but that's there. And then the Chinna Kachi, the leader is Panchu Bhagavatar, and then kind of another on the similar standing of Malekoti Govindasamy Pillai in the Chinna Kachi, Shula Mangalam Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar, who was also a Harikatha performer, and as Panchu Bhagavatar kind of aged, we see him kind of grow in power within the Chinna Kachi, and he kind of becomes like a leader, like kingpin kind of thing. And then we have Chidambara Bhagavatar and Ariyakudi Ramanujayar, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about them on the next slide, but these are also performers that ended up pledging their allegiance to the Chinnakachi. Okay, so obviously as there's two Kachis, there's going to be a lot of animosity and competition between them. So the rivalry becomes more intense in the sense that a lot of performers, they may have been invited by one Kachi to perform, and then they feel snubbed, and then they revert their allegiance to the other Kachi. So a lot of instances like this were kind of talked about in this chapter. So and also just based on like in Tiruvayar how it was played out. So because the factions were so opposite to each other, if like one prominent musician was playing for one group, there would be no audience for the other group that the other Kachi. And so that was, for them, it was always a battle to find the most prominent musician so that they could kind of reel in the audience. And then if two musicians of equal popularity were there, people would constantly be like flitting from one concert to another and cause a lot of disruption, and to the artist and also to serious listeners who were, there to see them. And then also there were these hooligans that would come and release water snakes into the crowd, kind of take advantage of the havoc that was already, and the tension that was already there. So just a lot of chaos in conducting the two aradhanas simultaneously. So we talked about Chidambara Bhagavatar, just an interesting little anecdote that the book talked about. There was like one incident where the water snakes were released into the crowd when Chidambara Bhagavatar was performing for the Periyakachi. And so it cut his program short. Of course, he had to get everyone out of the auditorium or the concert venue. And this Chidambara Bhagavatar was convinced that this was a ploy by the other Harikatha performances in the Periyakachi to kind of snub him or to like cut his program short. So then he went and declared allegiance to the Chinnakachi. So that's why he's kind of a prominent figure there. So because of all this craziness, the Periyakachi decided, or Govindasamy Pillai of the Periyakachi decided to postpone their celebration by 5 days, but still in Tiruvayar. So they would begin on the day of Tyagaraja's death and go 5 days after. And so Chinnakachi would finish on the day of Tyagaraja's death. So now the people of Tiruvayar were really happy because now they have 9 days of music and food and all that, instead of just 5 with a lot of chaos. So it was kind of a win-win for everyone there. And then we see Muttaya Bhagavatar, Harikesh Nallur Muttaya Bhagavatar, who I'm sure is a very popular composer among even now, right? He actually tried to effect reconciliation between the two Kachis. The book mentioned that he was previously not very politically active. He didn't really know what was going on in terms of the rivalry between these two. But when he was invited to perform, that's when he realized, oh, these factions are completely separate now. So he became very upset about that and tried a couple of times to reconcile the brothers, but did not work. So just to finish off kind of the administrative things, basically Chinnakachi then they register a formal organization to run the Aradhana, the Tyagaraja Parabrahma Vaibhava Prakasha Sabha. So now they have like a formal body that can run the Aradhana. And interestingly, Bangalore Nagaratnama's guru, Puchi Srinivasa Iyengar, was the vice president of this organization. So we can see that she has some ties to this whole this whole organization through her gurus and people who she interacted with. So continued, like the both Kachis grew in wealth and power, and they both relocated to bigger and grander venues. So both of them are kind of growing in clout, if you want to say. And then in 1919, the Chinnakachi kind of loses a lot of its major leaders. And I think by this time also, Panju Bhagwat, the main leader, he's also passed away by this time. And there's a mention that there's like 3 different people who assume the role of president and then pass away soon after. So perhaps this was just a coincidence, but the role of the president in the Chinnakachi is rumored to be cursed. So then Shulamangalam Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar, who had been the secretary for a long time and had already been kind of running this organization as Panju Bhagavatar kind of gets old, he assumes power, but he decides to remain secretary. So so there's no president for the Chinnakachi. But this doesn't really stop their assumption of power. They're still growing and things. They just don't have an actual president. And then kind of just another one of these like rivalry, the battle for supremacy kind of thing. The Periyakachi loses the support of Ariyakudi Ramanujamayar. And this story kind of goes like, so basically, Naina Pillai, who is another kind of prominent artist, he performs for the Periyakachi, but his show is like really dramatic, and they had to remove him from the stage, and it was very like, it was very crowd pleasing and very, again, like dramatic, and it was a big show. And then, Arekudi Ramanujamayar went directly after him, and his performance was very normal and didn't really elicit as much crowd excitement or anything like that. So then Arekudi Ramanujamayar thinks that the Periyakachi purposefully put him after Naina Pillai in order to snub him. So then he joins the Chinnakachi, which is the same pattern that we see among, many artists. And Ariyakudi Ramanujamayar actually becomes the assistant secretary to Shulamangalam after this incident happens in the Chinnakachi. And yeah, they're also battling over like who can bring the most food and the most elaborate menus and things, which is kind of funny because even during like Margari season and everything, even today, I think a lot of people go for the food into different sabhas. So it's kind of funny to see that was also a thing back then. So yeah. Okay, and then and then at the end of the chapter, we see that back to Bangalore Nagaratma. What does this have to do with all of her? So although all these elaborate festivities were being conducted, so actually because these elaborate festivities were being conducted, there's a lot of competition. So both of these groups are spending so much money to one up the other groups. They basically have no extra funds. Politically, they're both very powerful and they have a lot of power socially, but financially, they're not doing super well because they don't have excess funds after trying to like do all this like big pomp and celebration kind of thing. So neither of these groups took action to construct a permanent structure over Tyagaraja Samadhi in Tiruvayar. So it's kind of ironic because all these big celebrations are happening, but the actual Samadhi is still kind of neglected, right? So yeah, so neither group had surplus funds, and they kind of hinted that, oh, we'll do it, but these were just very superficial kind of claims because neither group actually had the means to construct this samadhi at all. And so then we see that this fact is what Bida Ramakrishnappa conveyed to Nagaratnama. He was kind of lamenting to her that this is the situation, who thereafter took a keen interest in this cause, which we'll see in the next chapter. Before I finish, I just also wanted to kind of see that we can kind of see in this chapter how music becomes a business, right? So like all this, the artistry and everything, and they're kind of profiting off of Saint Tyagaraja's death, right? They're gaining a lot of prowess and social recognition and things by conducting this aradhana. But when you go back to, you know, what the soul of this celebration is, the samadhi, we see that that's neglected. So it kind of comes back to, you know, what are they actually, like, what are their I'm sure they started this aradhana as a good cause for them, but we see that at the end of the day they kind of start becoming more interested in the money and the power rather than actually focusing on what, you know, is important in his actual resting spot. So that's where Bangalore Ragaratma will come in. Okay, so that's all. I'll stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Thanks, Mitra. That was really, really elaborate, and everything was very clear to go through with the chapter. Thank you so much for that.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Lakshmi, do you want to do chapter 6?
Maybe I'll just take us through chapter 6 quite briefly. So in this chapter, Nagaratnam arrives in Tiruvayur to see the Sannidhi after her guru talks about it. So we're told that she starts off by meeting Ramudu Bhagavatar, who's Tyagaraja's elder brother's descendant, and he takes her to see the Sannidhi, and she later describes her first visit. She says, "It's neglected and subjected to all kinds of misuse and abuse. It sorely pained my heart to look at the state of things." And this pained feeling that she experiences, she says in her words, it was a source of inspiration for her to begin a life dedicated to his cause. So she takes it upon herself to go and restore the conditions of the Samiti. So she first starts out by acquiring the title of the land, which she works by exchanging another piece of land that she owned. And she acquires this from Sahib Survi. Then she tries to make peace with both these factions. She meets both of them. The Periyakachi is more open to her taking over versus the Chinnakachi leader, who's less happy, but he chooses not to interfere because finally Samadhi will be getting a roof over its head. In 1924, we're told that the Chinnakachi's faction starts to break. A few musicians break out to create their own aradhana, unhappy with Bhagavatar's management of the affair. But this group never gets much traction. And Bhagavatar says he will stop his own, the Chinnakachi's work, if this other third group went on. So he stops all donations to the third group. And so Nagaratnam wishes to see both these groups united. She attempts to do this initially by calling both groups together and trying to reconciliate between them. But this doesn't work, and their point of main disagreement is whether or not Tyagaraja's elder brother's descendant should be the one to conduct the rites. So Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar, he reaches out to the sub-magistrate, and he extracts an agreement from Govindasamy Pillai, from the Periyakachi, that they would not stand in his way. And then, but Nagaratnama, she remains steadfast. She wants, she says this is her land and she has the rights to decide who should worship or not, and that she would refuse to allow anyone who wanted to break away to do so, to independently access this. And but this, however, does not work. This is challenged. The Chinnakachi leaders go to the sub-magistrate and they receive an order in their favor. Later, Nagaratnam tries to take this to court, but also she loses, and Chinnakachi is allowed to continue with their own celebrations independently. Another point, Nagaratnam associates with the Periyakatchi and they get along to run the event together for a number of years until the question of women performing here arises. Nagaratnam wishes to perform. She enters once and sings in the Sannidhi, and this is met with opposition by the Periyakatchi. Nagaratnam feels strongly that everyone ought to be able to worship in the Sannidhi, and she compares this with a previous example offered by Perikachi's musicians on the Shivalinga, and she argues that this comparison, anybody ought to be able to worship regardless of their gender or their sex or caste. So, Periyakachi musicians in 1926, in their Aradhana, Nagaratnam walks in and she begins to sing, but when this doesn't work out, she later tries to bring Veena Dhanammal, who is Govindaswamy Pillai of the Periyakachi's idol, but he makes a separate concession, allowing only Dhanammal to do so in a venue near the Sannidhi. But he does not offer any such concession to Nagaratnam. So she decides that she would conduct her own Aradhana here, and she brings 40 Devadasi women here, and in a clearing within the Sannidhi, near the Sannidhi, she organizes her own Aradhana. And we're also, what I found interesting was also the way the locals greeted the 40 Devadasis. We're told that there was much excitement, that they'd never seen this before. And that to me was quite striking from perhaps previous conceptions of them being prostitutes, not being allowed, this woman is being seen impure. So, I mean, it raises the question of who had this view and how widespread this was. That's something I found interesting. So I think we can maybe open out for discussion and for questions.
Hmm. I did the reading of both the chapters today, just before the session, and I had to skim through it, and at the end, I had this question as to why did Nagaratnam side with the Periyakachi at the beginning, or why did she even approach Ramudu Bhagavata to go and to take her to the Samadhi? I was like, what was the intention behind that, and why did she choose to show more allegiance to one side? Because I had this question because when she took the first step, both the factions were neutral about it. They were just happy that the Samadhi was getting a permanent roof, and they didn't offer any special treatment. But I was just confused as to why she made this decision. And if any of you have any idea, I would love to hear it.
I'll say I also kind of had that question, but I don't have an answer to it, so I don't know if that helps. But yeah, I was also, especially since Ramudu Bhagavatar was not the most prominent person in this whole thing. I just wonder what her choice was. Perhaps there was just some relation with them and her guru or something. But I'm not sure either. That's interesting choice for her. So.
I'm just assuming maybe because Ramanu Bhagavatar was the direct descendant of any reason for it. Just pouring into that. I probably would be thinking it from that perspective, but again, quite an interesting thought of as to what made her choose. But then, like leading it from what Mitra said as well, I think that's something that's striking me as to Do any of you want to add as to what was interesting, any chapters or the books that you all found, like something that really struck you all as probably an incident or some kind of a discussion that was really new within the thought process?
I actually found in the third chapter of Muthulakshmi Reddy, I found the father's views and how Reddy looked, she really looked up to her father, uh, and he as well supported her in her views of marriage and wanted what was best for her, and how there was actually a tussle between Chandramal and Narayan Swami after their how the wedding went on, and they even give accounts of how Chandramal visits her partner's garden because she has to ascertain her right with him as his partner, even though they were not in speaking terms. This was something I found very interesting. And how Muthulakshmi Reddy, with her medical background and her tendency to help people, made sure that she gave a detailed account of both her pregnancies and the trials that she faced during that time, for people uh, to refer and look up to. That was something very inspiring.
I totally agree. I think it was very interesting to see it very raw, very beautifully uh, not kind of, hidden or anything, but it was very beautifully kind of penned there. And I think what I also liked was Chandramal's reference to a possibility of writing a poetry when I found that very interesting. Like, is it like my beloved has gone? So I found that quite, I don't know, it just created humor for me there. I know it was not supposed to be that, but I found that very interesting.
Yeah, but I think that's the author's note in that segment, where it's just, I think, author of this book speculating that if only Chandrama will continue to do what women of her community did, she perhaps might have written a song about this.
Yeah,
But both the book,
absolutely.
yeah. But much like this question about then why did Nagaratnamal decide to choose one kachi over the other? There are sometimes some of these books seem to have like some jump cuts, or they go into detail on certain accounts, and then there are certain that are still very succinctly written but not really connected the dots. Because even the way chapter 2 and 3 were written, because in Muthulakshmi Reddy's earlier they had given of in the earlier chapter they had mentioned the timelines as to when she went back to Pudukkottai and when she came back and all of it. And then only in the marriage chapter you learn that okay, so by the time she came and she went to Pudukkottai and she got back, she's already got married and she already has given birth to a child. And all of these things have happened, and then I had to like keep going back and forth for that. And I was just on the topic of Muthulakshmi Reddy's dad. I was just thinking, because like I put, imagine if only Chandramal did all the shaming instead of whatever. I did not expect her to go berserk over. Oh, it's all on me. I didn't expect her to ever take the guilt on herself. But then all like the character arc up until then was that she was going to be a very mm, kind of old fashioned. Like now we will call her old fashioned, but then she was probably just being in line with, in a sense, she was patriarchal, right? She was following all those things. But then I didn't expect her to do that. And then to think that, and then how much then that whoever Muthulakshmi had as her father is highly pivotal to all that she was able to do, right from allowing her to stay unmarried, allowing has to be the word for that decade, till 28, and then deciding to let her be married to someone who's not essentially a Brahmin. I don't think they were Brahmin either. Yeah, and essentially an orphan at that. And I wonder how much of it would also have been influenced by the fact that, like, how much would he have remembered as to how his family created so much of a ruckus for his wedding to Chandramal. And what if he thought that it's okay, it's good that Muthulakshmi is not going to have a lot of trouble. And another point I was thinking was perhaps all that she was still able to do later on after her wedding is also because she has one less emotional toil from she essentially had no in-laws from all of this. So, okay. So many circumstances, so many things um, coming together. But then the way all of those Anglo-Indian not I don't know, I don't think it's Anglo-Indian. All of those British doctors, like professors, when they wrote such high praises, and to think that she was also doubted by so many members from that community was very interesting. Meaning, it's very inspiring. It's very inspiring, and to think that she could still continue to be a functioning doctor in spite of all the sleepless nights is just inhuman.
I think I also found the role of father of Sister Subbalakshmi that was mentioned, and um, how the effort was taken, especially being widowed at a very, very young age, usually kind of tied up to a lot of rituals within the family. I found that also very interesting. I found that that was another uh, big step, probably of that decades, then to kind of step into a daughter's life as a father and make sure that she's to actually move from a place to other, to make sure that her education is not stopped. I found that really touching, and I really felt that that would have been a big step for him to kind of take it for her, and that led to her supporting uh, other fellow young widow women. So I felt that that was really very interesting, and I don't know, I found that very very touching as well.
He had a lot of like Narayana Swami also had a lot of impact, right? There were several of his students. In fact, when they first come to Madras, it's only the help of his student that they first go and stay. So it's not like he has a prodigal daughter on whom he is trying to ride his, like trying to make some worth of his own life. Like sometimes, I mean, there are many anecdotes of how parents also do that, in the sense that they make their child's career their entire living because that's all that they have. But then he was a highly contributing member himself, and then he decided to do it. And there are a lot of accounts. I mean, there's a huge paragraph that says about how he helped in all the domestic chores when she was finding a footing in the first year of college. And like it, the fact that he did that in spite of whoever he is just sometimes there are very few really different people for that particular point in time, and then they make all this difference. And yeah, and there are some very interesting. I couldn't help but read ahead, and then there are very interesting anecdotes about all these lanes that at least I cross often in Chennai. Like those are all coming ahead, and I can't wait to read them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And also for me, I found really interesting the idea that her mother was so, she kept pushing for her marriage. Quite interesting because that's so out of ordinary for this community where marriage was not the norm. But also, I found a paper that spoke about this and how women in this community at this time were being pushed into conjugal relationships because that was largely the source of backlash against this community. So maybe that gave me a little bit more insight on why perhaps she was so insistent on marriage. And I think that's so interesting how her father held out against that view and supported her through her journey. So I'll just share that paper as well.
Kind of to that point also, it's when you compare Nagaratnama and Muthulakshmi Reddy, they're coming from the same community in kind of around the same time, right? But in order to face, like, they take the backlash in different ways, right? Like Muthulakshmi Reddy is getting the backlash, and yes, she doesn't agree to the marriage, but her mother kind of on the other hand is like, okay, push for marriage so that they cannot use that as something against so that they, the society can't use that as something against you, because that was the main problem. Whereas like Nagaratnama is like actively pushing, saying no, this is how we do it, this is how we kind of go. And the same thing with Muthulakshmi Reddy in terms of kind of shying away from the arts and going down a career path. Like so they react to their situations in very different ways, and perhaps that's the influence of a mother or the father figure, whoever kind of was influencing them at the time. So I just think that's interesting and good that we're reading them in parallel so we can see how different people react to the same situation.
I also felt like that. From the beginning, Muthulakshmi's dad have been doing all the things which are not normal. So somehow he started that snowball effect for her in shaping her future. And I think for the marriage, I think it is her mom who did not had that privilege of being a wife and getting that respect in the society. I think that's what pushes her in nudging her daughter to have that. Maybe that's what my thinking is. And yeah, and the another in Nagaratnama's thing, I felt as though when she was constructing the memorial for Tyagaraja, everyone were very happy because she was spending it, she was doing all the things. But when it came to paying respect, I suddenly felt, okay, there comes the gender. When she was constructing the memorial, the gender was not an issue. But when it is paying a respect, maybe for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, why gender there? That's the question came to my mind.
I think that is similar to how they treated the Devadasis on saying that they were meant to make offerings for the god through music and dance, and then not allowing them to make offerings in the Samadhi. Similarly, I think they use they use the gender card only when it benefits
Yes,
them.
when it
Yeah.
is needed, okay, you are spending, you are doing all the hard work, yeah, you do it. Okay, you are a woman, you are doing it, you are capable of doing it, yeah, go ahead, do it. We are sitting here and having fun. Okay, when the memorial, the offering came, okay, how come you can do that? You are not eligible, so very ironic.
I agree to the reference. Probably it's also the way they looked at Devadasis as well, had a lot of had a lot of reference to it, and I totally agree to that point of maybe the similarity that can be drawn from this concept, and that's why women wear. Yeah, I don't know. I
But
feel so as well.
But Devadasis, they never built temple, right? They just went to do the rituals and all the things pertaining to the worship, even the washing, cleaning, sweeping, whatever it is. They did all that, but they did not spend money to construct a temple.
Actually, that's interesting because I don't know how widespread it was, but then recently I remember reading in the news that they'd uncovered an inscription in a temple near Madurai where a Devadasi had actually donated land and built a portion of that temple. So I then found that interesting. I don't know how widespread this was again and how many of them had the resources or in what period this
I
happened.
think
But then,
I also vaguely remember someone constructing a pond for the water reservoir and other stuff. But I don't. It is not like constructing a temple per se.
right.
There also, I think I don't remember exactly. I think long back I read that article, and they banned her. And then after that, the rain was not there for that area for quite some time, like decades together. Then they did some amendment and all that stuff. I don't remember when you said that. It suddenly struck me. Yeah, something like that I have read.
Also wonder if the only reason they tolerated her taking over the land was because she had the resources to build this samadhi. So maybe at that point they were okay with whatever gender. They just decided they wanted that built over everything
Yeah,
else.
during that time the male ego did not come. Okay, she is doing it. How come she can do it? No, they were all happy. Okay, someone is doing it. But when it came to giving respect, I felt it is really cruel
Mm.
to behave like that.
I think there's one last, I in reference to this about not we see Sulamangalam Vaidyanatha Bhagavata when Nagaratnam Mama attempts to unify both the Kachis by saying, I will not that since it is her land, she would not allow the Chinna Kachi to the Samadhi. At that time, Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar convinces the sub magistrate and everyone that anyone who wishes to offer their obeisance could do so and could enter the land, and she had no right to say that. Her owning the land had no say in this matter, which would mean that anyone could enter the land and anybody could do their offense. So there are a lot of discrepancies with what they say and what they actually support. Yeah.
It's true. And I was also wondering when she talks about purchasing this land, she says like the registrar wouldn't register it at all because it was like public land. And then he wanted her to exchange this with another piece of land that she had. I was just wondering maybe what the laws were at the time and how that worked. So what right did she have over this land, or did it have to be open to the public, or I'm not too sure.
Any final thoughts before we call it day for those of you around the world? Yeah, any final thoughts and please, or any other further readings that you all come across, somewhere about and the Devadasi thing that you had mentioned. So if you come across it anytime, please do share it with all of us. Would love to kind of read about it. But if any of you come across anything that's alongside, and it'll add on to the reading. So please do share with all of us. It'll be nice to read together. I just wanted to add, if any of you would like to do summaries for the next week, please can you let us know, and we'll make sure we block that. And so you have the reading list. So it's Muthulakshmi Reddy's chapter 4, and then it is 7 and 8 of the other book. So any of you would want to kind of continue doing it, or you want
I think we may have lost Santosh, but yes, if anyone would like to go ahead and do a summary, please do let us know, and it'd be great to have any other resources you come across. Is there any concluding thoughts anyone would like to share? All right, then, so maybe we'll meet again next week at the same time. Look forward to seeing you there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.